Legends of Greek Mythology, The Story of Psyche, Part 1, The Palace of Eros. A certain king had 3 daughters who were known far and wide for their beauty. The most beautiful of all was the youngest, Psyche. When this youngest princess went into the temples, many people mistook her for Venus herself and offered her the garlands which they had brought for the goddess of love and beauty. The real Venus, much vexed by this, determined to be revenged on poor Psyche, who was in no way to blame. One day she told Eros, the god of love, to wound Psyche with one of his golden pointed arrows and make her fall in love with some wretched beggar, the most degraded that could be found. Eros took his arrows and went down to the earth to do his mother's bidding. As soon as he saw Psyche, he was so startled by her wonderful beauty that he wounded himself with his own arrow. Consequently, instead of making Psyche fall in love with some ragged beggar, he himself fell in love with Psyche. Long before this, the 2 elder of the 3 beautiful sisters had been married to kings' sons, as befitted the rank of princesses. But in spite of her superior beauty, no lovers came to sue for the hand of the youngest sister. The king, suspecting that this might be caused by the wrath of Venus, inquired of the oracle what he should do. The answer that he received allowed him no longer to doubt the anger of the gods. These were the words of the prophetess. "Dress thy daughter like a bride, lead her up the mountainside. There an unknown winged foe, feared by all who dwell below, and even by the gods above, will claim her, as a hawk the dove." The king was overcome with grief, but he did not dare disobey. Therefore, one night Psyche's maids of honor dressed her in wedding garments, and a long procession of her father's people escorted her to an exposed rock at the top of a high mountain, where they sadly extinguished their torches and left her alone in the darkness. After the last sound of human footsteps had died away, Psyche sat weeping and trembling, fearing every moment that she might hear the rushing wings of some dragon and feel his claws and teeth. Instead, she felt the cool breath and the downy wings of Zephyrus, the west wind, who lifted her gently from the rock, then puffed out his cheeks and blew her down into a beautiful green valley, where he laid her softly on a bank of violets. This moonlit valley was so sweet and peaceful that Psyche forgot her fears and fell asleep. When she awoke in the morning, she saw a beautiful grove of tall trees, and in the grove a most wonderful palace, with a fountain in front of it. The great arches of the roof were supported by golden columns, and the walls were covered with silver carving, while the floor was a mosaic of precious stones of all colors. Psyche timidly entered the doors and wandered through the great rooms, each of which seemed more splendid than the last. She could see no one, but once or twice thought she heard low voices, as if the fairies were talking together. It might have been voices, or it might have been the trickling of water in the fountain. Presently she opened the door of a room where a table was laid ready for a feast. Evidently, only one guest was expected, for there was but one chair and one cover. Psyche, half afraid, seated herself in the chair, and the fairies of the palace, or the nymphs, or whatever beings the voices belonged to, came and waited on her, but not one of them could be seen. She enjoyed a most appetizing repast. After the last dish had been whisked away by invisible hands, she heard music, a chorus of singing voices, and then a single voice accompanied by a lyre, which seemed to play of itself. As the light faded away and night came, Psyche began to tremble, for she feared that the owner of the palace might prove to be the winged monster of the oracle, and that he would come to claim her. There were no locks nor bolts, and the doors and windows stood wide open, as if no thief nor evil creature of any kind had ever lived. When it had grown perfectly dark, so dark that she could not see her own hand, Psyche heard the sound of wings, and then footsteps coming down the great hall. The footsteps came lightly and quickly to the low seat where she was sitting, and then a soft voice, which was sweet and musical, said to her, "Beautiful Psyche, this palace and all it holds is yours, if you will consent to live here and be my wife. The voices you have heard are the voices of your handmaidens, who will obey any commands you give them. Every night I will spend here with you, but before day comes, I must fly away. Do not ask to see my face, nor to know who I am, only trust me. I ask nothing more." This speech took away Psyche's fear of being immediately eaten, at any rate, but still she could not be quite sure that this voice was not the voice of the monster. Her mysterious lover came to talk to her every night, as he said he would do. Sometimes she looked forward to his coming with pleasure. At other times the sound of his wings filled her with terror. One day, while she was gathering roses within sight of the rock from which Zephyrus had blown her into the valley, she saw her two sisters on this rock, weeping, beating their breasts and crying out as if in mourning for the dead. Hearing her own name, she knew that her sisters must be mourning for her, supposing that she had been devoured on this rock. These sisters of Psyche had not always been kind to her, but she now believed that they had really loved her after all. That night, when her lover came in the dark, Psyche asked him if she might not see her sisters and let them know that she was alive and happy. She received an unwilling consent. The next day the sisters came again to the high rock, and Zephyrus blew them down into the valley, just as he had blown Psyche down. They were very much surprised to see the good fortune that had befallen their little sister, but instead of rejoicing at it, as they should have done, they were envious of her. They asked her a great many questions, and were particularly curious about the owner of the palace. Psyche told them that he was away hunting on the mountains. Then Zephyrus, thinking that they were getting too inquisitive, whisked them away to the rock, and that was the end of their visit. After a time, Psyche grew tired of being so much alone and wished to see her sisters again. Her lover gave his consent a second time, but warned her not to answer or even to listen to any questions about himself, and told her, above all, that if she ever tried to see him face to face, he should be forced to fly away and leave her, and that the palace also would vanish. The next day Zephyrus brought the sisters into the valley as before. These envious women had brooded over their sister's superior fortune till their minds were full of wicked thoughts, and between them they made a plan by which they meant to destroy Psyche's happiness. They told her that the owner of the palace was, without doubt, a most horrible winged serpent, the nameless monster of the oracle, and that the people who lived on the mountain had seen him coming down into that valley every day toward dusk. "Although he seems so kind," said they, "he is only waiting his time to devour you. He knows that you would be terrified by his ugly scales, and this is the reason he never allows you to see him. But listen to the advice of your sisters, who are older and wiser than you. Take this knife, and while your pretended friend is asleep, light a lamp and look at him. If our words prove to be true, strike off his head and save yourself from an awful death." With these words, her sisters left Psyche the knife and hurried away. When they had gone, poor Psyche could not rid her mind of the fears their words had raised. Her faith was gone. If all were right, why was her lover so anxious to be hidden in the darkness? Why did he fear her sisters' visits? Why did he have wings? Worst of all, she remembered with a shudder that she had once or twice heard a sound like the gliding of a serpent over the marble floors. Soon it grew dark, and she heard her lover coming. That night she would not talk to him. Therefore he went into a chamber where there was a couch, lay down, and fell asleep. Then Psyche, trembling with fear, lighted her lamp, took the knife, and stole to the couch where he lay. The light of the lamp fell full on his face, and Psyche saw no scaly serpent, but Eros, or Love himself, the most beautiful of the gods. Golden curls fell back from his wonderful face. His snow-white wings were folded in sleep, while the down on them, as delicate as that on the wings of a butterfly, stirred faintly, set in motion by his quiet breathing. At his feet lay his bow and arrows. Psyche dropped her knife, in horror at the deed it might have done. Then, taking up an arrow curiously, she pricked her finger on its golden point. Holding her lamp high above her head, she turned to look at Eros again. and now, for the first time, in love with love, gazed at him in an ecstasy of happiness. But her hand trembled, and a drop of hot oil fell on the shoulder of the god. He opened his eyes, looked at her reproachfully, and then flew away without a word. The beautiful palace vanished, and Psyche found herself alone.